Good evening. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Hingham, welcome to the League's review of the warrant for 2016 annual town meeting, which is scheduled for April 25th. I am Erica Sweeney, a member of the Hingham League Steering Committee, along with Kate Boland, Eva Marks, and Kathy Salisbury. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that seeks to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We do this through voter education, voter registration, and advocacy based on in-depth study of issues and consensus. Town meeting is Hingham's legislative body. Hingham has open town meeting, which means that anyone registered to vote in Hingham is eligible and encouraged to attend and vote. The League sponsors an annual review of the Hingham Town Meeting warrant to inform voters about upcoming issues and to prepare them for this opportunity. We also sponsor an annual candidates night in anticipation of the town election, which occurs on the Saturday after town meeting. Mark your calendars now for the candidates night here at Town Hall on April 6th. At the 2011 annual town meeting, Hingham voters approved an article brought by the League of Women Voters to have the town meeting warrant made available to the public 10 days after the mandated January 20th deadline for article submission. Those articles can be found on the Hingham Town website. I encourage you to visit the Hingham League's website, where you can find the Citizen's Guide to Town Meeting, as well as an abundant information about Hingham Town government. Tonight, I am pleased to welcome Tom Piles, Chair of the Hingham Advisory Committee. He's going to give us an overview of how the town meeting warrant is developed, discuss what we can expect to be brought before town meeting, and answer questions that his presentation might generate. We hope this will help you attend town meeting on April 25th as an informed voter. Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
And thank you, Erica. I appreciate it. Good evening, folks. Those that are in the at their homes, nice and comfortable and warm, and those hordes of people that are sitting in the audience. I appreciate you coming out on a night like this. It's great to be here to review the 2016 warrant. I first of all want to thank the League of Women Voters. They are doing a terrific job, and they've tirelessly have an effort to get people at town meeting, and the advisory committee so supports that effort, and we appreciate everything that you do. Town meeting really is part of what makes Hingham so special. I absolutely love Hingham, and one of the things that I truly think is great about Hingham is the democratic process that we call town meeting. It's how the citizens of Hingham conduct town business, and it's so important to make sure that we get as much participation as possible. And I hope that something that I say tonight may spark an effort for you guys to come. I know the people in the audience will be there. I'm encouraging people in the viewing public to be there as well. I'm delighted to be here to give some insight to this year's warrant. It's an extremely exciting year, both from a budget standpoint and a warrant standpoint. There's a lot going on, and there's something for everybody in the warrant. There's continued tax relief, there's infrastructure improvements, including the fire station improvements, school improvements, road building, Lincoln School capital improvements. There's historic preservation in the form of Second Parish Church CPC funding and community center repairs. There is a possible open space acquisition that I want to talk about a little bit tonight. Really exciting. There's a continued harbor development with the Whitney Wharf Bridge construction, and perhaps a new beach house construction. There's affordable housing development, and we're coming into the 21st century. There's a possibility of global warming coming to Hingham that I'd like to talk about a little bit. So what we'd like to do from a construction standpoint tonight is talk a little bit about the budget that is before us. I want to talk about how we develop the warrant articles. Then I want to talk specifically about some of the very interesting things that are going on from a warrant standpoint. So, I understand that the viewing public can see this. I would encourage people to ask questions from the audience. I wish they could do it from home, but we haven't gotten the technology quite yet there. But if you have questions about any of the slides or any of my discussions as we go along, I'd prefer to ask the questions right now, and so that we can address those. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the 2017 budget. The budget responsibility of the advisory committee is to look at the town budgets, the education budget, and capital outlay. I think it's very important to have a sense from the audience and from a public viewing standpoint that there is a very arduous process that the advisory committee goes through to vet the budget and the warrant articles as well. And it includes things like the liaisons getting together with departments, department heads to vet their interests, their requests, not only for their existing budgets, but for any additional services that they might need. It's up to our liaisons to evaluate the changes that would happen with the department, to assess the financial impact both in the current year and, very importantly, the future years as well. We don't want to get in a situation when we're approving a department's budget that may have a long-term effect that is inadvertent and may cause us, from a town-wide standpoint, concerns in the future. It's important that at the end of the day that we feel that we have a consensus and a balance between what is acceptable service levels from our departments and what's affordable from a town standpoint. A little bit about the financial impact of some of the decisions that we make. The advisory committee has a financial policy that has been vetted and accepted by the Board of Selectmen and the school committee. And it has a few tenets that are very dear to us that have not only held us in good stead through the years, but it's very important from a bond rating standpoint. It is very important that we maintain our AAA bond rating. From time to time, we do go to the markets to finance some of our projects and to obtain the very lowest interest rate that we can. We have maintained a AAA rating, and part of that is having a financial policy that effectively guides us to how we conduct our business from a financial standpoint. One of those is at the very, I know that this pointer doesn't come across to the audience at home, but it does for here. The first is an unassigned fund balance target of 16 to 20% of total expenses. The very good news from the standpoint of today's financial position, where the town is in such good shape, is that as of June 30th of 2015, we were above the target levels from our unassigned fund balance. We had a surplus of approximately $2.5 million, which took our percentage up to 23.3%. I will talk a little bit later about that because it will be impacted by some of the things that are on the warrant and how we handle that. We have a guideline of issuing capital outlay expenditures in the 2 to 5% of operating expenses, and we have currently been in the 3.5% to 3.7% range. And the town has sort of a policy that we are going to try to increase on an annual basis the amount of revenues that are set aside for capital expenses, because, very frankly, over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer than that, there are certain items that have cropped up that we have not been able to finance, and we need to catch up from an infrastructure standpoint. Some of that we'll be talking about further. what is a very important other target that we have is something called debt service. And the advisory committee has determined in the past that we ought to have debt service which is in the range of 5 to 7.5% of total expenses. Because of some of the very important large projects that we've had over the last few years, we have had the actual debt service closer to 10% rather than a cap of 7.5%. And that is not worrisome to our bond rating agencies at that time, mainly because we have a schedule that will bring that into conformity over the next few years. And we need to be judicious in how we vet future projects so that we don't get ourselves in a position where we have so much from a debt service standpoint that it becomes a burden on our taxpayers. So that is a very important thing. And while we see these as guidelines, the advisory committee, when they review budgets, are very conscious of these targets that we set and are part of the tenet in how we recommend to town meeting how we should be forming our budgets. While I've indicated that the town is in a wonderful financial position, as seen here from a fund balance standpoint, we do have things that are concerning to us in the short term and maybe over a longer period of time. One of that is that over a period of time, and it continues today, we've seen a slowing down of our growth rate. That is coming primarily from the fact that we went through a very nice period of time where we had significant increases in our revenue stream in the 4 to 4.5% range. That came from the development of large developments such as Derby Street, Linden Ponds, and the shipyards. Those large projects have come to a completion over the last 4 or 5 years and have driven our revenue growth down to the 2.5 to 3% range. I will tell you that if you continue this graph one further year, the projected growth rate for 2017's budget is closer to 2.3%. Again, a diminution of our revenue growth. And the reason that that is so important is because we look to this as the driver of what we can spend over in a year's period of time. To the extent that we have growth rates in the 2 to 2.5% range, that sort of caps what we can do from an expense standpoint. Does anybody have any questions on it? If there's a takeaway from all of the things that I'm going to say today as far as the financial condition of the town is concerned, this is a very important slide. And we need to send messages because for all intent and purposes, we will have difficulty this year and certainly in future years when this happens. Over the last 6 years, the growth rate in our expense categories has been in the 3.5 to 4% range. I'm going to let that sit for a minute. If you go back, and I will just briefly, to that slide, we have growth rates in revenues, which is all we got to spend from an expense standpoint, that are driving, that are available for supporting expenses that are growing at a higher rate. This is going to make this year's budget calculations difficult. We will do that. We have found pools of money that have increased our ability to meet the expenses that are being asked for by our town departments in the schools. but it will be a very difficult year going forward with these dynamics of a slower growth rate with levels of service requirements that are above that from a growth standpoint. So where do we stand from a budget process? I indicated this might be a tough year. As you can see here, as of February 4th, and that number has not changed dramatically as of tonight, the projected deficit from a budget standpoint was $2.5 million. As I was saying to Kate earlier, this is a very interesting night that we picked this as to be the night that we're going to talk about the review of the warrants, because tomorrow night your Board of Selectmen and your Advisory Committee will be voting on the budgets. You can watch on TV the Board of Selectmen on how they would address the issue of a budget deficit of that standard. I will tell you that I am comfortable that we have a path that will close that gap and not have to concern ourselves about service levels that we are now existing. Enough of the good news. We are now going to talk a little bit about the warrant articles. And to start off, we have a slide here of how warrant articles are developed. And it's very interesting. The very top of the slide basically says, here are the various committees, departments, areas of the town that originate requests for the town business to be determined at town meeting. Any of the departments in town, any of the committees, and most importantly, from my standpoint, the very last box on the very top right is the citizens' petitions. It is truly rewarding that some of the town's business comes from the town folk. We are delighted to have citizens think of and create opportunities for us to determine how we should conduct our business, and they're willing to go through a process of submitting a petition for a warrant article. From whatever source they come, it eventually gets down to our assistant town administrator for creating what I hope everybody will pick up, and that is the list of warrant articles to be vetted and determined over a period of time. Thanks to the League of Women Voters, we have a process now that says that the warrant book should be available and online for everybody's view. And I'm going to get this right. It's 10 days after the cutoff time, which is January 20th. So basically at the end of January, the town warrant articles have been closed off by and large, and are available for view for the public. And that is terribly important because we start a process of vetting the warrant articles at the Board of Selectmen's level and at the Advisory Committee level. And it's very important for public's input to that process. We should make sure everybody stays tuned to the agendas that are distributed and made public on our website so that they know when hearings are available. So if they have an interest, it's very important for the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee to hear those. And then, as you're aware of, it goes through the Board of Selectmen's vetting, the Advisory Committee's vetting. Eventually, the warrant articles, comments, and recommendations are cycled back through the Assistant Town Administrator. The warrant is published. It gets into the hands of the public, and it results in a wonderful process called town meeting, which this year is April 25th of this year. Yes, sir.
Doesn't town moderator?
Can I ask you, for the viewing public, that you come up to the microphone and state your name and ask a question? Thank you so much.
Sure. Jerry Clark. I'm curious as to when the town moderator gets involved, if indeed he does.
He gets very much involved, as you can appreciate. The town moderator is from a distance looking at this process as we go through this. He's very aware of the warrant when it's made public at the end of January. He does not get involved in any of the vetting that we do at the Board of Selectmen's level or at the advisory committee level. He does review the warrant with town council to make sure that it is in proper form for the warrant before it is published and distributed to the public. He is the one, as you might have imagined, is responsible for the ordering of the warrant articles. So when the warrant is actually published on a hard copy basis and distributed to all the town, he has influenced the timing of all of the articles. But besides that, which is part of what he does, he is very much involved to make sure that the warrants, with town council's advice, are in a proper form to meet the standards of not only us but the state, which has to approve the eventual warrants, especially if they're bylaw type of warrants. Very good question. Okay, so that's the process. There is a little bit of time involved in all of this. To some folks, the warrant discussion starts on January 31st. In fact, if you take a look at this slide, there are many of your committees and commissions and departments who have been at this for a lengthy period of time. The budget, I will tell you, starts in earnest in September, October, when a budget request goes out from our town administrators. The school department is busy in September and October talking about what their needs are. It gets developed in the the November timeframe. The Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee commence hearings on budgets in December and continue in January, and then they vote it in late February or early March. Likewise, from a warrant standpoint, there are certain deadlines and certain things that happen, such as the CPC, Community Preservation Commission, starts their application process in September and October, and all the way through this period of time until the warrants are vetted at the Board of Selectmen's level and Advisory Committee level. They're in the process of vetting their projects. The town zoning articles are due legally on December 1st. As I mentioned before, the articles for warrants have to be submitted to the town by January 20th, and then in earnest, the Board of Selectmen and Advisory Committee hears, vets the warrant articles in February and early March. I'm going to start a discussion about specific articles. We have 40-some articles, 9 of which are what we call money articles. And because there was a question from the League of Women Voters members, and because I thought it was important for you to understand that not all of the warrant articles are just do stuff, but some of it is a money ask. And I have put forth here the various articles that will appear before town meeting that do have a money request. First of all, we have normal Articles H and I, which asks for a withdrawal of funds from stabilization funds, which are set up to create revenues for expenditures in the current year. We have 2 such stabilization funds, and the draw from them that supports our revenues is $515,000 expected in 2017, for 2017's budget. We have what we call Article M, which turns out to be the transfer of reserve funds at the end of the year. The town is committed to truing up all budgets so that they're zeroed out, and we do that by estimating what any deficits will be or any other reserve funds are requested for other reasons. We won't know that if you try to think about what we ask our accounting department to do. We're asking them to look at and estimate what the end of the year, which has to be June 30th, by April 25th, what those needs are going to be. That level, if there's a requirement to take away from the existing, to take more away from our fund balance to support those funds, won't be available until April 24th, the day before town meeting. So if there is an Article M that requires us to true up our balances for our expenses, it will only be known when we come to town meeting. So sorry I can't tell you that. I don't have a crystal ball. It may be that we won't have additional funds required to true up those expenses from our various departments. But I will tell you that as of right now, our fund balance, which we budget for, of $550,000, our reserve fund, which we budget for $550,000 a year, has already had expected draws of in the range of $450,000. A large part of that usually comes from snow and ice. We've had a very fortunate winter this year. We are hoping that there are no more storms, that there's no more ice, there's no more salt that we need to put on our roads, there's no more trucks we have to do scraping for, so that we won't have to take away from the fund balance to support that this year. Right now, we have an article that would increase the design funds for the fire station renovations. I will tell you that they are meeting tonight, right next door. They know that that's an important figure for us to have for our warrant review, which will happen next week, and they will have to come up with a figure for additional funds, if any, that will be required for their continuation of their studies. The good news is we know exactly what CPC has been asking. That is not going to be a draw against our available funds. It is funded through, as you all realize, a surcharge on our real estate taxes, and they are going to spend out of their annual funding of $1.423 some odd dollars for 12 wonderful projects that have been vetted and approved by both the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee for recommendations before the town meeting. Hot off the press, as of last night, CPC also has asked the Board of Selectmen to open up the warrant, which they will do hopefully tomorrow night, to accept a new warrant, which is going to ask the town to spend $4.5 million of town funds, of CP funds over the next 20 years for the purchase of the Lander properties. That, again, is outside of the draw from available funds. It will be funded a debt offering will likely be funded if it's accepted at town meeting, and it will be funded out of the CP funds on an annual basis over that period of time. The next item is legal services for the water company acquisition study. That figure that I put in is my estimate. That has not been put into our warrant. It has not been heard. We will expect to hear from them starting a discussion tomorrow night. It may be 100,000, it may be 300,000, but that additional request for funding for continuation of that study and litigation process for the consideration of our acquisition of the water company will cause an additional draw on our available funds. The school committee has a warrant before us to look at a potential renovation and potential add to the high school to augment their health and welfare center which we again will be hearing at Board of Selectmen and Advisory Committee over the next couple of days. A very exciting program. The school committee has put this at the top of their list of projects going forward, and you'll be hearing a lot about that. As with most projects that we have, we go through a process that says, town grant us a certain amount of money that will be put forward for feasibility or design studies so that we can, in a future year, come before town meeting and ask for the construction funds if it's appropriate. The school committee will be asking us to spend between $100,000 to $200,000, again, my estimate, so that they can be authorized to go ahead with those feasibility and design studies. Again, that will be a direct draw from unassigned fund balances. We also have a very exciting article coming before us that we have deemed to be the road building article. Citizens are going to be very pleased with the fact that we are discussing the accelerating of our road building and road restoration so that some of the roads that exist in some communities do not have to wait for their 5 or 10 year program that the engineers department has scheduled. They're looking to accelerate that program so that we can get our roads in a better position. And they have a 5-year program that they're going to ask town to authorize of $2.2 million, which will not be a draw against fund balances. It will be a borrowing. It is projected. The Board of Selectmen and Advisory Committee have both authorized the funding in a borrowing capacity, obviously to be determined by town meeting. But that is a wonderful project, and we look forward to progressing with that. Another draw, and this will be a draw against the fund balance, is the Lincoln School apartment capital projects. The Lincoln School apartments has been through a process called a capital needs assessment. They've determined that over the next 5 years, they need to restore, repair, bring up to date certain items. They feel that that might be a cost of $1 million. It would be done through a loan by the town to the Lincoln School apartments and be paid back over a period of time through an increased lease payment over the next 10 or 20 years. So that is a significant draw against unused fund balance, and it will be significant. We also have the school department asking for a second phase of their SPED trust fund implementation. You may recall that last year we drew $250,000 from the fund balance to place into a stabilization fund called the SPED Trust Fund that's available for the purpose of the school department to draw upon if there's a very unusual need from a standpoint of servicing our SPED education children. Several years ago, we had a situation where 2 students needed to be outplaced at a cost of approximately $500,000. And at that time, we did not have such a trust fund available. It needed to be funded through normal expenses, and it put a very big dent in the expenses of the school department. The state has provided us with the ability to set up a trust fund to literally circuit break that circumstances should it happen in the future. We have a desire over a period of time to build that up to a perhaps level of $500,000 to $750,000. We put in $250,000 to that last year. The school department has asked that we continue that progress by additional $100,000 this year. I'm going to stay with this slide for just a minute because it's very important. I will go back, if you'll bear with me for just a second, to this slide here. We talked about financial policy and where we stood against our targets. One of those is the unassigned fund balance that should be in the 16 to 20% of total expenses. As of the end of last fiscal year, we were above that target level at 23%. The total dollars equaled about $2.5 million. Now, the bad news is if you estimate what the draw against unused fund balances is going to be this year, it may be as much as $2 million. That surplus fund balance that we so much enjoyed may be for just a short period of time. We don't expect large additions to fund balance that aren't going to be used for helping us balance the budget for 2017. So for all intent and purposes, any draws that we have from a warrant standpoint for these wonderful projects will be a direct draw from that surplus fund balance and get us probably down closer to our high end of the target level, hopefully above that. Now, I realize that there were some questions about this from the League of Women Voters. I want to make sure that if there's questions that anybody wants to, it's a complex chart. It happens to be a very important chart. Our normal processing of warrants always has, not always, usually has some of these articles that will be draws against fund balance. There's always a project that's being dreamed about and created in town that always ends up to be funded by design and feasibility studies. The way that those are handled are through warrant articles such as these. Any questions? Okay, now to the exciting part. We'll talk about specific, and I've alluded to some of them in the prior slide, but we're going to talk about specific warrant articles. Some of you in the audience have the sheet that has the numbers associated with the various ones. I can assure you that those numbers will be, those letters will be turned into numbers when the actual warrant comes out, and they won't be in the order that we are presenting them. This is a snapshot. This is, with the help of the League of Women Voters, this is my hit list of the interesting ones that we're going to discuss at town meeting. We have so many exciting things going on, and so many, I could talk about 40 of them, but I've checked I just want to talk about these very few. Article N, as we alluded to, is a fire station renovation study that's going on. We have determined that over a period of years, the existing fire stations are in need of repairs and may be in need of different size and structures and types of buildings. The fire station committee, which is meeting right now as we speak, has been at it for over 18 months. They are not ready to talk to us about exactly what they're going to recommend. They are going to ask us for additional funds to continue the studies so that we get it right. It's an important part of our servicing of the town, which is expanding in different areas. They're looking at not only the size, but perhaps the location of the fire stations. They're even thinking at one time about whether the number of stations are the appropriate number. This article is not going to be asking for construction money. It's not going to be making recommendations for the size, the actual construction, the siting of these stations. It's merely asking for additional money so they can consider the study. Questions? Okay, back to CPC. I talked a little bit about the Laner properties. We haven't put in a letter for that because Board of Selectmen have not opened the warrant to include that. I think it's going to be VV, but whatever it is going to be a warrant article that is being proposed by the CPC for the acquisition of the Laner properties. Earlier in the year, the 12 projects that were proposed and approved included a down payment for the Laner properties of $500,000. One way or the other, CPC is going to ask the town to consider $5 million for this purchase. $500,000 is already an O. Whether VV takes over all of that or whether we have two different spending articles in two different pockets, we'll work that out. But it's an exciting project. The CPC has voted unanimously to propose this to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen intend to open up the article tomorrow night, and then we will go through our vetting process over the next couple of weeks to make a recommendation to town meeting. The other really exciting thing about CPC is the continuation of harbor development. There are two projects that were in that $1.4 million approved by the CPC that relate to the harbor development. The first one is the hopefully the final request for funding of the Weir River Bridge. That is a very important part of the walkscape that is being developed by harbor development. It will enable people, once completed, to go from one end of the harbor to the end, 3/4 of a mile, and walk safely from one end to the other without, in a very pleasant and safe way. The other exciting article that came out of the project that came out of CPC request was something that we deemed to be called the beach bathing house. It's the bathhouse, the bathhouse project at the harbor. You all realize that we have talked about some renovation or redevelopment of the bathhouse at the beach. There is some very exciting things going on. As late as yesterday morning, the town picked up a grant of $700,000 to support the renovation and or construction of a new bathhouse at the harbor. How that gets into the CPC article is that the grant from the Seaport Development State Committee requires that there is skin in the game from the town. This article asks for $150,000 to go for the feasibility and design study for the construction of that bathhouse, and knowing that we have the additional funds for the construction makes that article compelling. From a development standpoint, from a design standpoint, it is in a very early stage, such as the siting of that. There will be opportunities for public involvement in things like the siting of it, the scope of it, as we go through the normal process in our town when we vet any type of construction article. Conservation Commission, Planning Board, Historic Commission, other commissions that may be involved in the vetting of that project, which is exciting because if you stay tuned and look at agendas, you as citizens can get involved in how those projects are eventually come out. So stay tuned. That's I think everybody was excited, both with the harbor development articles and the Laner properties that came out of the CPC process over this last year. Article P, I know this is a hot topic. Article P merely asks for additional legal fees for continuing our legal process of determining a price for the potential acquisition of the water company. This, again, is simply an additional request to continue the legal effort to determine a price. There is no part of this that basically is saying there's a price set, that we agree with the price, nor is it a town meeting article to accept that price. We are still in litigation. The courts have not determined what the appropriate price will be. The determination, the judgment of what the price will be may set off additional legal action that needs to be heard by the court as to whether the parties agree upon that price and we have a deal, or whether litigation continues. Assuming that there is going to be appeals once the judgment is determined, the Water Acquisition Study Group wants us to continue the effort to determine the price, and will need additional funds to get there. I wish I could be here saying a judgment has been made, a price has been determined, and this year's town meeting will determine whether we should go forward with that. It's unbelievable. We've been at this for 3 years. We hope that it will be something that we can consider at perhaps a special meeting or next year's town meeting. And our lawyers basically feel that in that time frame, we will have the ability to come to town meeting if we determine that it's an appropriate thing to put forward an article for the acquisition of the water company. Talked a little bit about Article S, which is the High School Health and Wellness Center design. Very exciting project, again, at the very top of the priority list for the school committee. One of the typical processes that we go through. School committee is asking for a limited amount of funds, not the construction funds that will be requested after we go through a process of vetting the feasibility and design, and then if we determine that it's something that we should go forward with, it too will go through the process of planning board, conservation commission, et cetera, before they come perhaps next year to us with a town meeting article for the actual construction of the addition to the high school. I want to touch upon V, which is the road building article. To a certain extent, the genesis of this article was that we as a town have a program to bring our roads up to a certain level of expectancy from our citizens. It seems that while that program is being very helpful to us, the citizens of the town feel very strongly that we could accelerate the effort by spending a couple $1 million more over the next 5 years. From a financial standpoint, anecdotally, if we accelerate the road rebuilding, it actually long-term saves us money because it would cost us, more roads would go in disrepair and be more costly if we don't attend to them at this time. So this article is asking for that loan that we talked about from the town to be spent over the next 5 years and paid for over a longer period of time, and would be a wonderful ability for us to satisfy a need that all of us feel are appropriate of accelerating the road building program. Talked a little bit about Lincoln School Apartments, wonderful asset of the town. The cash flow is doing very well. It unfortunately doesn't throw off significant surplus cash from those operations to keep up with an aging building's needs for restoration and bringing things to code. So the town is going to be asked to enable that program of capital requirements of approximately $1 million to be lent by the town and then be paid for with interest by the Lincoln School Apartments over a period of time. One that isn't a money issue is the Town Administrative Special Act. Again, something that we had an interest in, and the League of Women Voters also wanted to have that. This is a continuation of the effort that we had at last year's town meeting. You may recall that town meeting was asked to establish a bylaw that would codify the duties that now reside with the town administrator, so that it could be very clear to everyone the delineation of the duties that the Board of Selectmen would have the town administrator do. That article that established the bylaw was nothing more than codify the practices that we've been doing over the last 25 years and best practices of our competitive towns, and we passed that very nicely last year. This is the next step, which was recommended by the Town Administrative Committee last year as a consideration, that we actually go to the state, get approval to pass a special act which would take the term may and determine it to be shall, i.e. that the delegated responsibilities of the town administrator would be part of the legal aspect of the bylaw of the town. It's a complex issue, but I will tell you The rationale for that is mostly because when we go out and think about the next step in our evolution from a town administrator standpoint, at some point we will be faced with replacement of our town administrator, and it is very apparent from the communities of the cities and towns that we compare ourselves to that if we do not have a special act that puts this into place, we will have a limited pool of candidates for replacing our town administrator when that event occurs. Again, I know that that was an interest to the League of Women Voters. It's an important thing for the town to consider, but if there's questions that pertain to that, I can address those now. Crystal clear? Everybody understand that? It is a complex issue from a legal standpoint, but it is a very important issue. The last one that I wanted to touch upon is LL, which is solar panels. We are at the point where there, again, is some interest in town to help us with becoming more climate control oriented and enable us to, in a very small way, participate in the cost of putting this part of our energy onto the grid and perhaps reduce a little bit of the impact of our tax rates. But as important as it is from a financial standpoint, what is really exciting is that we are considering an article that will put solar panels into the town that may help us from a long-term standpoint, both with our financials, but with a more important part, and that's that we should be thinking about alternative energies. You probably know that we already buy through the grid a certain portion of our input from the outside from a solar standpoint, but this would enable us to do a little bit of that on our own and may be the first step to going forward in the future with other exciting projects that we could put around town. I will tell you that we are very early in the development of this article. There is some questions about the design, the financials of that need to be vetted by the Board of Selectmen and the Advisory Committee, and we hope that over the next couple of weeks we can get that done, but it is a complex issue and there's very precious little time between now and when we have to put the warrant into print, and we're interested to see if we can accommodate that in the next couple of weeks. Questions, because those are my favorites, but you all may have other favorites that are on your list that you want to talk about, and I'm prepared to do that.
Kate Boland, 338 Main Street. I just have two quick questions.
Sure.
One is the Lincoln Street apartments. Was there opportunity to use CPC funding for that?
As a matter of fact, only on a very limited basis. Last year, you may recall, there was a CPC article that addressed some repairs that were done on the elevator. Strangely enough, the elevators were deemed to be historic, and we were able to determine that CPC funds were available for that purpose. For restoration, repair of the building that is required in their capital needs assessment, it actually is not legally able to fit into the CPC requirements. It doesn't fit the historic level. For some reason, it doesn't fit the affordable housing level, and it probably has something to do with the legal setup of the housing trust and the housing authority. But we have been led to believe by town council that unfortunately CPC funds cannot be used for this purpose. It's a legal issue, They would like it to be CPC money, we would like it to be, but it turns out there's been a lot of draws on the CPC, and if we approve the Laner property, limited funds on an annual basis may not be available for a project of this size.
And my second question is the fire station renovation. I know that we approved to put together a committee about 10 months ago, so they've been working, and they're coming back with a different bent. We gave them $500,000 last year. I was wondering, coming forward, did they look at the town over 10 years like the school committee did? I mean, have they come to you yet? Or just because I know the school committee says what it's going to happen for 10 years versus let's fix this, let's fix that, long term.
Yeah, they are doing demographic studies, especially as it applies to the siting. And you may recall that at one of the presentations they made 10 months ago, they were basically trying to determine whether there would be a need for a fourth fire station. They are going through all those demographics that include calls, where they come from, where the long-term growth of the town is likely to be, to your point. To make those determinations, we have not heard back from them. We will have an opportunity to ask those questions. A wonderful example of how the public can look at agendas and see when those hearings are going to be had, either by the committee themselves or by the Board of Selectmen or the advisory committee, and get more informed from that. And it's very important that we get input from all the citizenry, but I know for a fact that they're looking long-term. One of the reasons that they're considering the size and the type of buildings they are is because the type of equipment that they have today may not fit the needs of the equipment that we need for servicing our citizens 5 years from now. So they are doing that. They have not talked to us about that yet. They're scheduled to do that, and we would encourage the public to attend those meetings so that they could weigh in. Great questions. Anybody else from the audience? There's a lot of articles, a lot of interest in it. As I said earlier, there's something for everybody in the warrant this year. And I'm sorry that we didn't have the time to go line by line, but I think the highlights are there, and if anybody has any other interests that are burning to them, I'd be happy to talk to them about that. Any other questions? Okay. Resources available for furthering your interest in this. As I said, the town has a wonderful new website that includes a calendar of events that are forthcoming in the next few days. If you have interest in a specific issue, you ought to look at that. Look to the Board of Selectmen's schedules, look to the advisory schedules, so that you can get updated on when they're going to be hearing them. The advisory committee has a website page that includes a summary of where we stand from a budget standpoint, where we stand from a hearings at the warrant article hearings, and a calendar that looks out over the next couple of weeks on when we will be holding hearings. And as alluded to earlier, we have a wonderful pamphlet from the League of Women Voters called The Citizen's Guide to Town Meeting, and I would encourage everybody to go to their website if they don't have a hard copy of that, where you can get more informed from that standpoint. Okay, I have one public service announcement before I finish off with my presentation. It really is important for the citizens of the town to be active in this process. We encourage you to get involved at town committee meetings, at Board of Selectmen meetings, at advisory committee meetings. you have to realize that you're reaching out to departments, committees, Board of Selectmen, advisory committees. It's the way that we get informed. We cannot do our job from a diligence standpoint, from a vetting standpoint, if we do it in an isolated standpoint. We have to, want to, and are again informed by what we hear from the public. We get a better product from hearing from you. So please look at the available times, not just this year, but in any time. Make your voices known. It's really, really important, and we listen. I would also say you are the town meeting is the legislative body of the town. The citizens are the town meeting. We would encourage, as the League of Women Voters do every year, to get more attendance at town meeting. It's very important to us to see that important business of the town is conducted by the citizens of the town and not by a select group. I would encourage you to grab a friend, grab a neighbor, offer a drive, increase the attendance at town meeting this year. I want to thank you all for listening. I love my job. It's an exciting year from a warrant standpoint, and I hope I've given you some insight into some of the warrants that we're going to be discussing. Thank you, Erica, and I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, very informative. We appreciate it. And at this point, I'd like to open it up to questions. If anyone has any questions, feel free to bring them up. Just come up to the microphone.
I'm glad they did it along the way so that there wasn't anything at the end. Our future, our choices, our town. Get to town meeting. If there's any questions, I'm available. You got my email address, you got my phone number, you know where I live. And over the next few weeks, you can come visit me twice a week at advisory committee meetings, because we still got some work to do. Thank you so much, all.
Thank you.